Awesome. And I guess we're live.
Yep.
Super. Thanks so much for joining in, folks. I think we're seeing like Smarth and Leon. We were just discussing on the backstage. There are so many familiar faces. So I hope this session is equally exciting for you guys. And like most of you all would already know, there's our second workshop in this series. First one was on analytics. This one on design. So for folks who are joining in new, just as always, quick intro into the community. Then we'll be handing it over to Smart to introduce us to today's session and our speaker for today. Then we'll jump into the session by Leon, and we'll come back for some interesting Q&A that you guys have. We also have a couple of questions, but for the paucity of time, we'd love to take the questions that you have first. And we have a small surprise, as always, towards the end, including some gift hampers, thanks to the team here. So without further ado, I think, Smart, we're good to start. I think there are lots of people already. I thought we'd wait for 2-3 minutes, but I think we could get started, right? What do you think?
Yep, we start on time, we end on time.
Awesome. Okay, so super. Okay, let's get started. So for everyone who's joining us new today, the Product Folks is a volunteer-driven community of product managers, product marketers, product designers, and enthusiasts. In case you're one of us, feel free to DM us on Twitter. In case you aren't already on the Slack channel, feel free to fill the form. We'll send you an invite. A bunch of initiatives for early stage folks. We have the Teardown series. This has been running for the last 6 months. Bunch of them have transitioned via that. Lots of them learning hands-on stuff. So do check that out. This month we have Oyo in the series. We partnered with Oyo for this one. Another resource is Learn PM with me and Insurjo.club. Do check that out if you're early in your career. For folks a little later in your career, do join our exclusive clubs. This is to network with people who are already in their product careers and find mentors in the space. You could join our city-wise WhatsApp groups as well, or you could join in the Slack channel that I mentioned earlier. We have another interesting set of events already coming up, so do check it out. It's on the website, but not going to hold up today's session anymore. So hope you guys enjoyed the series. Please feel free to share your notes on social. Don't need to record this session. We will be, we are recording this. We will be putting it up later. But in case you are taking down any notes, if you like any points, if you have any feedback, feel free to DM us or tag us on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we'll be sure to engage your content with our community. And with that, hope you have a great learning session. Handing it over to Smart, and welcome, Leon.
Awesome. So we all know wireframes are important, probably the most important tool for anyone really to communicate and convey their thoughts and ideas. It's not text or emails or the hundreds of memos we exchange at work. It's the visual things. It's the mock-ups. Doesn't matter how low fidelity those might be. So when we sketch something out, it makes much more sense to us, right? And to everyone around us as well. So if you are in any way part of that product development lifecycle at your organization or even your own venture or startup or whatever you might be involved in, well, let's just say that you cannot communicate without wireframes. You cannot do that effectively. So whatever you say otherwise turns blubber. Without mockups, you won't get the support your ideas need, and you probably won't even know why. So that's how important wireframes are. I'll stop here because I'm not an expert myself. Just quickly running through the agenda. We'll start soft, look into what wireframes are, bust a few myths here and there, why those, why mockups are probably important in the product cycle. Steps to create great meaningful wires, understand the entire process behind that, have a super quick demo of Balsamic, one of my favorite tools. And then, of course, do a little hands-on, like Suhas mentioned earlier as well. So for all this, we have a very special guest with us today. Leon was back in his early days, UX designer for over 10 years and has been in multiple hats, since then. He's helped teach UI design and wireframing, principles to Balsamic's audience of mostly non-designer folks, and others as well. Now he's the head of UI design education team there. And if you ever visit his personal website, we were just talking about this, you'll find it's a gold mine. Tons of talks and writing there, and of course, a lot of fun stuff there as well. Leon's a UX wireframing front-end web development guy. So the common thread in all his work has been helping people and technology get better. Welcome to the product, folks, Leon. I hand this over to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's maybe one of the best introductions that I've ever gotten. Also, it's really great to see that you clearly understand the value of wireframing and what wireframing is about, and not just making something pretty. As you mentioned, a lot of our audience is non-designers. Balsamic was originally conceived as a way to help product managers. By the founder was a developer who wanted to create a tool to help his product managers communicate better. So product folks are a huge part of our audience now, as well as maybe designers who are starting out. But as you'll see, we kind of keep our tool very simple and easy to use on purpose so that anybody can use it, even if they're not a designer. So with that, I'll go ahead and give a little presentation. I will be talking not just about what wireframes are, but showing you some tips and tricks for creating better ones. Are you able to see my first slide?
Yep, Leon, we can see your screen. And Leon, just before you continue, one point that I wanted to mention to our audience is thanks to the entire team at Balsamic IQ, I think this is going to be a little bit that they're going to be sharing the best practices. And right after that, Leon's going to be showing us how to exactly do it. So I'm excited about that part. And Smarth had one interesting announcement for you guys. So Smarth, in case you want to say that, I'd love to say it, but I think in case you.
Thanks, Vas. So yeah, we have a hands-on session, right? Like Suhas mentioned, and there is a special gift at the end. Now, I'm not sure if I should be disclosing this special gift right now, but I think I'll just stop right there. But it's a special gift, so just wait till the end of the session and do that hands-on activity to the best of your abilities, because there's a big reward there.
Yep. And feel free to tag Leon for feedback. So as soon as you're done with it, take a screenshot and post it on your Twitter timeline. Tag Balsamic IQ, tag Leon, tag the TPF handle, and 3 lucky winners will be getting it. Something from their team and something from our team. So sorry, Leon, we held you up for another 2 minutes, but over to you for the next 30.
No problem. All right, so let's get started. So I'll talk a little bit about me. I'll talk about what wireframes are, and then a little explanation about why to wireframe, which it sounds like you have a good understanding of already. And then I'll go through what we call the 5 steps to creating great wireframes, and then I'll do a demo and have time for Q&A at the end. So as you heard, I'm the education team lead at Balsamic. I have worked there for 8 years now. We're a fully remote, fully bootstrapped, independent software company. I did UX as a UX designer for about 10 years, and now my job at Balsamic is primarily teaching other people how to do UI and UX design. So what are wireframes? Here's a definition from one of my colleagues. A wireframe is a schematic or a blueprint that is useful for helping PMs, developers, and designers think and communicate about the structure or of software or a website before building. So it's basically it's a sketch of a user interface. It's a way to digitally create an idea, a visual of what you want to build before building it. Here's some examples of wireframes. Wireframes can either have a lot of detail or a little detail. The one on the left you might call a low fidelity wireframe, where the text is not there. Some of the exact details are not there, using, say, placeholder things like little like those squares. And then on the right is a little more high fidelity, where you have some of the text and some of the navigation fleshed out, but it's obviously not fully complete, and some parts are left to be designed, but there's multiple levels of detail for different times and reasons in the project. Here's another example. This one has some annotations in it, where you've included some new notes in the wireframe, and I'll explain those a little bit more later. So one of the most common questions we get about wireframes is, what's the difference between a wireframe and a prototype? I like this slide because it uses an analogy in a different domain, architecture. So a wireframe is really more like your architect's blueprint that's used to kind of sketch out the idea and communicate with other people on the team, before way before anything is built. Whereas a prototype is more like something that you might show your client at the end, or something you want to show off, when there are no more changes that are going to be made. This is more of a finished final thing that you want to show off, but it's really less about the instructions for building it and more just an image of what they can really expect at the end. So a prototype is really, it's a high fidelity representation of the final product. Another way to look at it is that prototypes are fairly rigid, whereas wireframes are always flexible. So why wireframe? Now that you know what wireframes are, why should you do it? Why not just jump straight to code? Why not build prototypes? After all of these years, why are people still doing it? Well, I think the key thing, to note is that design is not done in a vacuum. Making software is a team sport. It requires a lot of people with specialized skills all working together. Otherwise, the software isn't going to be good, even if everybody individually is very good. So, building good software requires specialization, having people who are dedicated designers, PMs, developers, etc., who are really good at one particular thing. But the problem with that is that those people often kind of speak different languages. They think and communicate in different ways, and that makes it hard for everybody to come together. There's gaps in the understanding, so that really comes at a cost, that specialization. This image has been circulating for probably at least 20 years about the different ideas that people have when you describe something, both from the customer perspective versus how other people on the team, you're all talking about the same thing and you think that you're understanding it the same way, but you're all thinking of something different in your mind, basically, when you're communicating with words. And the great thing about wireframes, if I could really boil it down to one point, is that what wireframes do is they get everybody on the same page. They're visual, so that everybody can actually see something rather than describing it using words, which can be kind of ambiguous. Wireframes are kind of a universal language. It's visual, it's fairly simple, it's flexible. You can use images, you can use text, you can use different things to communicate in whatever the most effective way is. So it's a critical step in order to move on to before you really start writing code and creating something. And I think the question we get second most is, why do they look the way that they do? Why do they have to look so rough, like they were drawn with a marker, or like a kid drew them, or something like that? And there are kind of more high fidelity or high quality wireframes that look nicer, but we really advocate for keeping them kind of rough, because it's very intentional. It makes it clear that this is not the final design. Nobody's going to mistake it for the final, the real thing. Nobody's going to think that this is actually the screenshot of the actual product. And it kind of conveys this idea that, hey, this is something rough. This is all up for discussion. Give feedback on it. I'm not just going to hand it off and say this is done. This is kind of the equivalent of just a sketch on a napkin. It's just meant to say, hey, this is an idea. What do you think about it? So to really, say this in the shortest way possible, wireframes are cheap, both in terms of cost and time, and writing code is very expensive. If you've ever worked on a project where you've had to go back and rewrite some code because you got the requirements wrong, or the feedback from users was really negative, that takes a lot of time, and it's a very tricky thing to do. Making changes earlier on is much easier than making changes later. So that is the biggest justification for why wireframes are useful. So now I'll dive into some steps for creating great wireframes, the right way, which is a little bit more involved than most people think. But really the idea here is that the more time you spend in the beginning, the less time you'll have to spend at the end or redesigning. So design is part of a process. Usually starts with kind of a divergent process where you're going broad and trying to generate more ideas. And then at a certain point, you reduce those ideas to the best ideas. So wireframing is also a process, just like any design. So the first step is to articulate. And what that means is you don't want to start designing before you really know that you understand the problem. And it's often easy to think that you understand the problem, but then once you go down the line, you realize that maybe you didn't. So the important thing is before you start doing any UI design, take a few minutes to write out the scenario you're addressing explicitly. You have to first understand who you're designing for, what problem you're trying to solve, and if you can't answer these basic questions, then you're probably not ready to start designing. So go back to your requirements or your user research. And so what that looks like is that what we like to do is in the first wireframe of a project, start out by asking some questions and then actually writing down the answers inside of the wireframe. So questions that we usually ask are, who are the users of the site? Is it one main type of user? These could be your personas. Maybe you have a regular user and an admin user or something like that. Write down as much as the main points that you know about them. And then what are their goals? What problem does this product or feature solve for them? Their goal is not to use the product. They have goals beyond that to do something with it, or what real problem does it solve for them? And then it can also be helpful to write down some of the actions or the operations they're likely to perform. What are some of the common workflows so that you can think about optimizing those as you go. Another thing you can do as part of this phase is to do a sitemap. And this might be a way to kind of map out those workflows or flesh out the different user use cases a little bit more. So do this before you start doing any UI design so that you can refer back to it as you go. The second step is generate. And this is also what's kind of known as the fun part. This is when you get to play designer. And really the idea here is just to try to be as creative as possible and come up with as many ideas as possible. This phase is all about quantity and speed and just coming up with lots and lots of ideas and having fun. So you can just start by adding a bunch of UI controls to the canvas and moving them around. Maybe just drawing a lot of squares and boxes and arrows and moving them around just to kind of get those creative juices flowing. And if you run into a roadblock, don't overthink it. Just start a new wireframe and start from scratch. And if you start doing an idea and you know it's a bad idea, just keep going with it anyway, because you know that you may not be implementing that idea, but maybe there's something good in that bad idea. So really just focus on getting as many ideas out there. And really, you don't want to be thinking too much. You don't want your analytical brain to be interfering with the process. It's okay to be messy here, and you don't want to be judgmental about your ideas. This is a quote I read recently. It's actually about writing, but I think it really applies to wireframing as well. So expect 80% of the ideas to happen after you start, and 50% of those you start with to be wrong. So this really speaks to the fact that you may think that you know what you want to build when you go into it, but if you limit yourself to that, you're probably missing out on some of your best ideas. So don't just necessarily give the customer what they ask for, or just do a quick wireframe of your idea to hand it off to somebody else. Spend a little bit more time in this generating phase and to try to come up with different ideas. So one of the things that I like to do is try to come up with at least 3 variations for any kind of major UI screen or idea, just to push myself a little bit and just challenge myself a little bit. So don't stop after your first idea. And when you're doing that, you don't want to just be limited to, okay, I have A and B, and then my third one is just going to be a combination of those 2, because you're going to miss some opportunities there. So you really want to always try to come up with something that's a little bit out there, that's a little bit, you think is a little bit weird, or it's a bad idea. And then, because who knows, later on down the road that might actually give you some ideas for some good ideas. So really, when you're trying to come up with ideas, try to think as broad as possible. The third step is to iterate. And so this is the point where we're really starting to bring some of those ideas together. So if you've done the previous step successfully, you should have a lot of ideas and directions that you didn't anticipate originally. And so now is your chance to kind of go in with a little bit more of a judgmental eye and pick out some of the good ones and try to refine those and maybe kind of merge some ideas together. You want to piece together the best parts of all of your ideas and collect and combine concepts that address the user needs in the most elegant way. And then you can go in and add a few more details that you overlooked in the previous step. And also, it's okay to add collaborators, add some colleagues at this point. Say, here's a bunch of my ideas. What do you think? Do you want to help me work with this? Now that you've kind of like got some of your ideas down that you can show somebody. That earlier stage is just about, it's just for you. It's to get all of your ideas down. But now you can kind of start to bring in other people and get their ideas as well. So you're kind of starting to see some concepts come together. But you still don't want it to be final necessarily. This is really a way just to pick out some of your best ideas, add a few more details, but you don't want the final design here, because you don't want to be limited. You still want to be open to more ideas. And you don't want to include too many details like fonts and colors and animations, because those will be distracting for the next step. So here's an example of, say, taking 3 different concepts and kind of combining some of the best ideas into one. And so it may seem like, okay, now I'm done. I did this iteration step, and now I'm ready to hand it off to developers. But not quite. This is actually only step 3. Because wireframes are not just one thing. This may be the end of the design phase, but as we know in the software world, there's more to it than that. So what do I mean by that? Wireframes are just one thing. They're just, a picture of an interface. But going back to that idea of, the making software as a team sport, we haven't involved the rest of the team. So we've come up with a good part of it, but we still need to then bring in the rest of the team so that we can actually deliver that feature or that piece of software. Wireframes are both design and communication artifacts. So those first 3 phases are the design part of things, and then now we're onto this communication phase. There's really kind of 2 main phases, which are the ideation phase and then the communication phase. So you want to come up with a design, and then you also have to explain it to people and get buy-in. So the next stage is to communicate, and this is an explicit phase in the process. You don't want to just throw it over the wall. You become the storyteller, the advocate for that design, because if you show it to somebody, they'll look at what's on the screen, but you also have an opportunity to add your own comments and contexts. So it's good to present these in a meeting or on a call. Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because you've arrived at a solution that you're done. Coming up with a good design is often only 50% of the design process. Communicating your idea and following it through all the way to implementation, that can take as much or more effort than the design phase. So it's important to include not just the design, but to give the story behind it, give instructions for developers. So at this point, you've put a lot of effort into it. You've put a lot of thought into it, but that thought might not be completely clear in the wireframe. So take a little bit of time to give that context. And this is an opportunity to get everybody on board, get people to buy into it, especially if people are skeptical. So one thing you can do is you can add these annotations to your wireframe that you might. So this is why you don't need to build out a full prototype, because you can just put a sticky note on here and say this is an animating carousel or something, or this information comes. We need to talk to the marketing team. Anything that other stakeholders or developers need to know. This is going to use our default style sheet or something like that. Just throw that in an annotation so it's kind of instructions or a recipe for somebody building it. And you wouldn't do something like this in a prototype, but you can do it in a wireframe. This is just a concept. This is not an image of the final thing. This is something that's a work in process, and it's kind of a living document. And then the last step is to validate. A big mistake that people often make is falling in love with their design. So you got to play designer and you really like this cool thing, but then you forget about the fact that you're not building it for you, you're building it for a customer, and their customer has certain goals. So take the time to make sure that your design is actually worth building and actually can be built. So show it to the developers and make sure that they actually understand it and can build it in the amount of time that you have. You know, software design is always full of constraints. So you want to make sure that feasibility is not one of those. So provide an opportunity to get feedback on the design after communicating it. Don't just hand it off. You know, let people give their input, because if you've done your work correctly, they will have input for it. So build in some time for some last minute changes. You know, talk to somebody with the best understanding of the user's problem, and then say, hey, you know, is this actually going to solve their problem, or is this just going to make it worse? You know, because remember, at this point, no code has been written. So, you know, you may be eager to hand this off to development, but once coding starts, it's going to be a lot more expensive to make any changes. So make sure you take a little bit of time, maybe meet with everybody just beforehand or something like that. Just have one last look at it, do kind of a reality check, go back to that first wireframe where you have the user's goals and the sitemap, and just make sure everything kind of lines up with that. You know, really, ultimately, you don't want the right solution to the wrong problem. So take the time to make sure that what you're proposing is actually the right solution to the right problem. So just to kind of summarize this, you want to take the time to get it right at the start to save time in the end, like I said before. And going through these 5 steps is kind of a way to ensure that you're kind of ticking all of the boxes. You know, this is a lot for a simple thing like a wireframe, but you know, hopefully this presentation has showed the value in taking that time to do it the right way, because the result will be better than just sketching out your first idea and then moving on from there. So that's the gist of what I wanted to talk about as far as what wireframing is and some tips for using it. So the team I work on, we're responsible for something called Balsamic Wireframing Academy. It's part of the Balsamic website. It's at balsamic.com/learn. We have tons of articles, including more information about these 5 steps, you know, explaining what wireframes are. We have videos, courses, tons of links about things. So highly recommend that resource. Everything on there is free. So if you want to learn more about wireframing, that's a really excellent resource. And so now I will jump into a demo. But just before that, I think that there was a PDF sent out. If not, I'll make sure that you get these links to both the presentation, and then here's some links from the some other links to, you know, commonly asked questions about wireframing, about Balsamic. You know, how much does it cost? What different versions are there? Can you get it for free, etc. So with that, I will move on to my wireframe. Maybe I'll just pause for a second to see if there's any questions.
Yep, we see a lot of questions.
Guys, do you guys want to do questions now and do hands-on right after, or which order do you all prefer? We could quickly take whatever you guys want. Just hit it out in the comments. In the next 30 seconds, whichever we see more options to it. I know there should have been a poll option. Is there a poll option? Yeah, there is a yes/no poll.
Is it?
I do want to make sure that we have time for the demo though, because I think people would probably.
Yeah, so let's do that first. Okay. So it's going to be a food app you mentioned, right? Something like a DoorDash, maybe.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I'll try to do it fairly quickly, maybe about a 10-minute demo just for how Balsamic works, and then I'll show you the specific use case that I mentioned. So it just, if nobody has used Balsamic before, I'll show you what it looks like. So there's an empty canvas here. There's a list of your wireframes here. The layout is kind of similar to a PowerPoint or a Keynote or something like that. But the difference is we have all of these user interface design controls, and these are not interactive. They're just kind of drawings of interface elements. You can drag them onto the screen, and then you can rename them. You know, this is submit, and then this is. And then they all have different options that you can use. So if I go over here, there's kind of different things that I can set. I can add an icon, mark or something like that, and then I can I want to make this the selected, the default option. So that's basically how it works. So, and then there's a quick add search. So if I want to search for a control, I can type it in here. So say I want to do a tab bar, and then this is actually the more high fidelity wireframe skin. We have two different skins for it: the wireframe and the sketch skin. So here's your sketchy skin that's going to look a little rougher, and then you just double click to edit, and then you can do home, menu, about, contact, whatever, and then everything is resizable, and there's tons and tons of things in here. There's a whole bunch of icons that are built in using the Font Awesome icon set. There's like 500 icons that you can put in there. There's a sitemap control where you can type in kind of a hierarchical view your sitemap, and it'll build this sitemap for you. So that's basically the gist of how it works. And as you heard, I'm going to, for this example, I'm going to try to wireframe like a food delivery app, just for something fun to do. And so if any of you have already downloaded Balsamic or are using the cloud version, there is something that I want to highlight. And so this is if you want to share these, one way to share it on Twitter. Like you heard, you can either take a screenshot, or if you're using the cloud version, if you go to the sharing options, there's an option to allow public reviews. And so that will generate a URL that anybody can just view, not edit publicly. If you want to share your wireframes on the web, is kind of a fun way to do it. I thought about doing this and having everybody watch them, but I don't know if it would crash with 200 people on the same wireframe. I don't know, but Balsamic does allow like a real-time collaborative wireframing, so multiple people can do it online at the same time, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so let's look at this. Let's look at some of these Grubhub screens where I want to, or DoorDash, or I'm not sure what the local ones are like there, but probably similar, where you want some food delivery. So maybe you specify, when you want it, where you live, what kind of food you want. Maybe you pick from a specific restaurant. We can do a desktop view, a mobile view. And then, so like I said, I also like to think of some different ideas too, and not just, I might not just copy this exactly as it is. So I'm going to look at a couple of other websites for inspiration that are maybe in a different domain. So this is Airbnb for choosing an activity or a house that I want to rent, but it still has this idea of choosing a location and some other parameters. It kind of has this big search box, kind of a nice picture that lures people in. And then now, instead of restaurants, I have different types of options, but they still have kind of a similar thing. If you look at, it's got a text, it's got a rating, it's got a price, it's got images, that sort of thing. So I might look at this for inspiration too, or I might even look at YouTube, because that has a different layout, but it also has kind of these cards that I'm going to click on, where there's an image and some text and some other kind of metadata information. But I kind of like these kind of tabs, these tags up here. That's kind of a cool idea. Maybe I could borrow from that. So let me jump over to Balsamic, and I'll do a new wireframe, and see what happens. Maybe I'll do the web one. I'll add a browser, and then I know that I'm going to probably want something that looks kind of cool at the top. So I'm going to add a big image here, kind of a big banner or hero image here, and then let's see, I can do a search box, but maybe this is kind of the default search box for like a website search or something like this. But I want it to be kind of big and cool. So, and I haven't practiced this at all before, so I'm just kind of making it up as I go. I'm going to I like to use these shape controls in Balsamic. They're very versatile, especially in this early phase where you're just building it out at a high level. So I'm going to do a really big search box here, and then I'm going to I'm gonna put a little button here that just says go. Make this selected, make it a little bigger, and then what if I have an idea where I kind of want, instead of specifying specific categories, maybe I want to do an autocomplete, or I want it to have it be really smart so I can type in a food or a specific restaurant. So I'm gonna just had this idea, so I want to remember it, but I don't necessarily want to go through the time to actually build it out. So I'm going to say this is going to be smart autocomplete and match restaurant name, type of food, descriptive words. What if I allow people to type in like best or cheapest? Wouldn't it be cool if I could just type in like, oh, I want the the best Mexican food near me, or something like that. So I'm just going to put that as a sticky note, as a kind of a reminder to me. And then I am going to do, I think the one thing that people do need to put in is their location. So I'm going to have another, maybe I'll do another smaller search box here, and this is going to be autocomplete 2. Maybe I'm gonna, this probably has to be done first. So I'm gonna put this here. I'm gonna put this here, and then type your address here. And I'm gonna give people the option to, to have it find their address automatically. Maybe I'll just make this big too, so it lines up and looks nice. And some kind of text here that I'm going to have, and then maybe once they enter their address, I'm going to give them some of the best picks. So I'm going to do, I think at this point, I'm just going to do this image placeholder, because I want to play with a couple of different layout ideas first, before I even start to dive into some of the details. So, this is kind of enough for my first concept. Now I'm gonna try another concept too. So, see, I'm gonna duplicate this one, and I'm gonna, I won't come up with 3 different ideas here, but I'll try to at least come up with 2. Going back to that YouTube example, I'm gonna try something with these little tabs here. So I'm gonna do a shape here. What if I don't even do a restaurant, or maybe I'm gonna make the search a lot smaller, and I'm gonna instead make it more of a browsing interface. I'm gonna do Indian food, Mexican, Chinese, sushi, and I'm gonna kind of like make these, big and bold. Put these kind of in the middle here. And let's see, maybe I'll just put in a little bit of text here. Pick your theme. We'll make this, kind of, so it's a different way of approaching this, where, they don't have to search. I kind of do some of the work for them, and then maybe I'm going to say this, top restaurants near you. And so instead of, putting the burden on the user to give information, I'm going to kind of suggest things for them by default. And then I'm going to say, let's I'll just do one more little part. So rating, I'm going to say see, I can have rating, distance. Maybe it's kind of like what's hot or what's popular, newest. You know, and I'm gonna maybe give them some filters that they can filter from instead of again, instead of kind of making them search, just like, hey, show me what's good, show me what's really popular, or what's some new restaurants, or what's something really close to me. So I'm kind of, you know, I'm thinking out loud. I didn't have any of these ideas when I started. I'm just kind of, as I start designing, I'm, you know, getting inspiration, and then that leads to something else, and that leads to something else. So, you know, I think that that's probably enough just to give you an idea. And so I'll probably leave it off there so we can have a good discussion. And also, if there's other things that you want me to show in Balsamic, whether it's specific features, or if you want to ask me, you know, how would I design the mobile view of this, or what do I do about responsive design, or something like that, then we can do that. And so I would like to kind of challenge you to come up with some ideas on your own for a food delivery app that is different than what you see out there already. You know, what are some other sites or examples or ideas that you can have that are different and interesting, and that people aren't doing? And, you know, you don't necessarily have to think about what you know is technically feasible, or, you know, think outside the box a little bit. What if it's focused only on a certain cuisine, or what if it's hyper local and focused only on your neighborhood, you know? And because with wireframes, it's just a way to come up with ideas. So what's something, you know, rather than just recreating in a wireframe form an existing version of something, you know, I would love to see ideas that people are coming up with that are, you know, really novel ideas for, you know, how can you rethink food delivery using wireframe. So I think maybe I'll leave it there, and then we can just spend the rest of the time talking. How's that sound?
Sounds awesome. I think we're already getting a couple of people on the chat asking for, you know, how would we see the same thing on a mobile screen, and if you could share how to, you know, make things responsive. So I think people are definitely in to see some more. Maybe we could cover that in the next 5-10 minutes. And sure. Meanwhile, like Leon shared, guys, please do take some more time. I'm sure Leon here is an expert, but we can definitely, I was trying out on the side, and yeah, it's definitely going to take us longer. So don't worry about it. I think we could submit it by 10 a.m. tomorrow. And Ritika asked, where do we submit the wireframe? Ritika, like Leon shared, you can just share to Twitter, tag the Balsamic IQ team and the TPF team as well as Leon. So you'll share some feedback, and the top 3 will definitely get special gifts from our side. That's just to encourage and to like make it all competitive. But go for it, give it your best shot. For people who are already in this space, we'd expect something way more. But for everyone else who's picking this up for the first time, let's learn more. Okay, so we'll definitely like, and y'all can keep like parallel apps in your mind. It could be Swiggy's, Zomato, anything that you use every single day. Keep that in mind. See something that is, you know, that is missing, that you think you could experiment from other places, like I think Leon shared, that it doesn't really have to, you don't have to pick inspiration from another food delivery app. It could be even from like an Airbnb. So Leon, over to you. Would love to see,
okay.
I think you're already sharing this.
Sure. Yeah. So we have an article on our site all about wireframing for responsive design. And so this is very detailed about if you really want to, you know, do it right, you can think about, you know, making different blocks for things for different screen sizes. And so there's much more in-depth information here. We also have some articles about mobile design, how do you design for even different mobile screen sizes. But I will do a little demo here. One thing that I like a lot, and I'm going to go back to one of these Grubhub images. You can't see it here, but one of a design pattern that I really like is the card design pattern here. So when I was doing a wireframe, I was just doing some placeholder images here. But once I get into the more detailed design, and sometimes I might do this off to the side, I'm going to build out this card layout. So I'm going to And I'm going to do it off to the side because if I'm going to duplicate it a bunch of times, I want to spend a little bit of time to get it right here. So, and you'll see why I'm doing this in the context of responsive design in a second. Because another trick that I like to do when wireframe is kind of inside out design. So start by doing a very high level design of the whole screen. And then once you have maybe a layout that you want to work on, start by designing some of the lower level components first. It's kind of in a way like mobile first design or something. So maybe this is going to be my card, and I'm going to put an image here of the restaurant, and this is going to be the restaurant name. Let's see, I'm going to do a star here. I'm going to make this smaller. And give this star, give this a half a star, 3.5 stars, and then we also have some shortcuts for things where you can just draw little bits of squiggly text, which is good when you don't know what the whole thing is going to be. So I group these together so I can get everything aligned a little bit. And so say this is a brief description or something like that. So that's going to be my just first pass at my card layout. And now I'm going to group this together. And now when I, maybe in my next iteration of this one, I'm, instead of having these placeholders, I'm going to use ones that have a little bit more detail. And so now I have this card widget, and maybe for the sake of this, I will just do it next to it. And now I'm going to think about what are these kind of maybe atomic or low-level components that I can reuse. And so I'm going to say, on the desktop view, I'm going to have them side by side like this. But on the on the mobile view, they're going to be stacked on top of each other instead. So I'm going to think about the components, and a lot of times in responsive design, anything that is repeated left to right will just go top to bottom, and then the other things are kind of compressed in their width. So this is just going to be the width of the phone. Maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger to accommodate this. It's a little more appropriate. And then, like I said, things that are side by side often go top to bottom, or maybe they get compressed into 2 by 2 rather than all side to side. So I'm going to just think about breaking things up that way, and then this, instead of being the full width here, I'm gonna there's an option here to transform a control. I'm going to transform this just to a regular block of text, and then this will wrap. I want to make this a little bit bigger now, but still maybe smaller than it was initially. I'm going to center this. So this is going to wrap, which it didn't do before. These are going to go down here. So, the basic idea of responsive design is you're just taking some things and just shrinking them. Other things are gonna wrap. So instead of doing 4 across, I'm going to do 2 by 2, and then other things are just going to go into one column. So that's how I would approach it. That would be my first pass at a responsive design for that particular example.
Fair point. Thanks so much, Leon. I think in the limited time we have, you did awesome. I'm sure you have way more practice in this, but I think that gives us a great outline of this. And thanks for sharing those resources. Quick question before we jump into the question that we have here. I think Shushmita asked, what were the shortcuts you were using? So is there like a list that you have that we could refer? How do you pick that up?
Yes, of course. keyboard. I'm just searching. We have a list of, I will go back to sharing my screen real quick. We have a list of keyboard shortcuts in our documentation. And so it will show you all of the keyboard shortcuts. There's really a lot of them. So, but a lot of things that you expect would work, you know, copy, paste, there's Command or Control D for duplicate. And then we have these kind of drawing controls thing here, which is a relatively new feature. There's a little video on it where you can kind of sketch some of these controls out by holding down a key. So holding down the T key will draw some text. Holding down the Y key will draw like a big title, and then the R will draw a rectangle. So that's if you really want to go fast and push yourself.
Got it. And what would be the best way for someone post this workshop? What would be the best way for someone to, you know, really pick up this as a skill? Do you suggest replicating some that are online? Do you have like a list of problem statements that they can work on? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, so there are, sorry, I should keep sharing my screen. So there are some things you can do to get, if you don't know what ideas to build, I think there's like a daily UI prompt or something like that. There's a couple of these that you can Google, and it will say something like, I guess they want you to join in, but, you know, yeah, build a daily UI, you know, build a food delivery app, or build a, you know, here's a whole bunch, a sign up workflow, a credit card workflow, a landing page. Here's a whole bunch of them. But on our site, we also have an article I really like, which is how to start a wireframe project. You know, you have a blank canvas and you don't know what to do. So we have 4 techniques to start with. And one, which I showed before, is starting with the words, the articulation step. And so once you write those things down and maybe you have a sitemap or kind of a flow diagram, then some of those screen ideas will come to mind. Creating a sitemap is another one. Taking an existing design, one thing I didn't show is that you can drag in images and screenshots. And I could just kind of do this hybrid of real screenshots and then wireframes to kind of build in things that are already there, rather than having to recreate things from scratch. And then this is finding inspiration elsewhere. So, you know, if you want to create a sharing dialogue, look at how Dropbox does things and kind of copy that. There's another one. Let me find it really quick. And this is copying to learn. So this is kind of the example where you have something that you want to build on, and you just build your design over it. So here's an example where my colleague is importing a screenshot and kind of like building the interface in wireframes on top of it. And so that can be kind of that's a really good exercise too, to learn how to use it. And so now you have this wireframe version based on something that's real. If you just want to practice using the tool and how you might lay things out. So there's a bunch of different techniques, but it's always great to start with something that exists already, or recreate, you know, the app that your company's app using wireframes just for practice.
So I think this gives us great insight. Smart. I have a couple of more questions, but do we get started with the Q&A since we have about 5-6 minutes to go? So,
yeah, I guess we should do the Q&A now. I see one of these questions, like we have 14 votes on that, so it's pretty important, I would say. So this was asked by Karthik: how to convince stakeholders who just want new designs exactly the same as the previous version. So how do you do that stakeholder management?
Yeah, I mean, what I didn't cover is that just the role of soft skills in the UX or the PM designer's role. I think the best thing to do is really have that conversation about who are the users and what problem do they want to solve. So anytime you have somebody who is either saying, oh, we can't build this because it's too hard to implement, or I want to build something really cool or do it like you know, Facebook does it or something like that. So you really try to have a discussion about what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how would the design, how how does the design relate to that? So is the problem that the UI is really bad and people can't navigate it? Then that would be a justification for, okay, let's focus on a UI redesign. But if the problem is it's missing this key feature that people really need to do their jobs, then you can say, well, it doesn't, yes, it would be great if it looked really nice, but the most important thing is that it works. So sometimes, it really depends on what problem you're focusing on. Sometimes ugly and functional is good. Other times, you're competing in a crowded market space and the user experience is going to be your differentiator. So it comes back to understanding the problem, understanding the market, understanding your users. So have that conversation first before you dive into the UI design, because you need to know why you're designing what you're designing.
So yeah, align yourself to the goals there and you would do good. Yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I had a question. I think a lot of folks have been asking, and I'll combine this with another question, is what you spoke about is probably either, low fidelity, high fidelity, and then we come to, where they use tools like Figma. So what is your stack? How does the process look like, right? Once you go from ideation to building out the entire product, right? So idea to maybe a low fidelity, which is maybe using a tool like Balsamic IQ, then you go to high fidelity on Figma, then do handover, then the product gets built. But would love to hear from you on how does the entire process look like and how do you break this down?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the size of your company, maybe the expertise of the people involved, whether you're co-located or synchronous or asynchronous. A lot of companies, large companies, do use prototypes. They can be useful for user testing, and then of course now a lot of tools, which is great, is that they can generate some of the code you might want to use. The problem with prototypes is a lot of times you just have to throw them away. So you're spending a lot of time building something, but you don't have something then you can reuse in the code. So wireframes you're throwing away, but that's okay because they didn't take very much time to build. So a high fidelity tool, something like Figma, can be useful when you have a lot of people designing. You want consistency. Maybe you have a very big team, but it's still, then there's a low fidelity step before that where you're doing the ideation. One thing that you can do, which I really like, is if you have a design system or if you have designers that are somewhat competent in code, is that you can then kind of match your wireframes with your design system, and then you can skip the prototyping step because it doesn't have to look like the final thing if you know what all of your style sheets are going to be. So you can do an ugly tab set and know that, oh, this is going to look like this because it's already coded in our design system as these sorts of tabs or this navigation bar. So the better communication that you have, the less you really need, I think, a tool like Figma, because a lot of times you are building something that already exists in a way. You're just reusing existing components. So I think it doesn't have to look like the real thing, as long as the developer understands that, oh, when I make this box, it's really going to be this, thing, this widget in our code that already exists. So you're just kind of piecing together widgets that already exist, and you don't need to go the extra step to show that it looks like the final thing, when you can just talk to the developer and they'll kind of understand what you mean, if you're able to have those conversations. But again, it really depends on the size of the company, the way that you work, and other things. And some people just insist on it. They really like high fidelity prototypes, or there's other reasons. But I think that more, people don't use prototypes more than they need to, because it's hard as a designer to, if all your deliverables look like they were drawn by a child, you want to justify your high salary by making something that looks really cool.
Right. Leon, we do have questions here, but I'll just like to step in and I'm going to ask you to just reiterate what the challenge is, because a lot of folks are really quite interested in that. We also have a chat about having an entire dedicated Slack channel to all these submissions and just keeping up with the practice. So the first challenge was about the food app one. So can you just just reiterate what the challenge is, and then we can just continue with the questions.
Sure. So I would like to see the challenges to come up with, say, the most interesting, the most novel, the most viable food delivery app wireframe. So maybe I'll since we're picking 3, maybe I'll pick the one that is the most viable, the most novel or interesting, and maybe another one that just shows off the best wireframing skills. So those will be I'll pick those 3. So those are your challenges, whichever one you choose to do. But try to do a food delivery app using Balsamic, and either make it the best, most realistic, or the most fun and different, or just show me how good a wireframer you can be.
Super. That sounds exciting. And guys, we've extended the time limit to 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. So you could tag Leon, Balsamic IQ, and the TPF team, and we'll be engaging. Top 3 will get some special guests from the team. And we've also shared a Slack channel. The Slack channel, we'll be creating a new channel within our existing group. This is to practice Balsamic IQ. For the next 7 days, we'll be having like a daily UI challenge. There's no winners here, but this is for all of us to get better at it. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Smart. We'll take a couple of more questions. I think there are some very interesting ones. I'm just going to take the ones right on top. Leon, just want to check if you have a hard stop, or if we could extend by another 10 minutes.
Yeah, we can extend. I don't have a hard stop.
Super. So picking up the ones that have been most upvoted, guys, if you could please help us upvote, that would make our lives also a little easier. So on the top 3 right now that I can see, 2 of them seem like a rapid fire. So I'll start with those. Is there anything like a good wireframe or a bad wireframe?
Yes, that is. I think that's the question that I've been asking myself since I started. What is a good wireframe? And I think a good wireframe is an effective wireframe. So think in terms of it's not the one that looks the nicest. It's the one that is most effective in getting people on the same page. So the goals of a wireframe are to help you, the designer, come up with the best version of your idea, and to communicate that idea as clearly as possible. So I think a big mistake people make in wireframing is spending too much time making them look nice, because that is not necessarily the best use of time in terms of what's going to be good for the user and solving their problem. And then the second biggest mistake is not taking the extra step to make sure that you're involved in the handoff phase, so that I see this all the time, and this happened to me in the beginning. You design something, you spend a lot of time working on it, and then the developers just go off and build something else, or it doesn't make its way all the way to implementation. So a good metric would be how much of your design made it into the actual product. So you really have to gauge it against the final product, not against how great an idea it is or how much people say that they like it, but you have to measure it against what actually gets built. And then, did you do a good job of connecting it to the user's goals?
Smart, I'll take one more before you can jump in. As a continuation to this, I think Archie asked, how do you develop a better sense of UX, right? People talk about design sense. Sometimes it comes intuitively, but apart from any research, do you know of any framework on how people can get better at design sense or UX sense?
A couple of things. I think the best way is just to do it. It's kind of like learning how to write or something. The more you do it, the better you will learn. Looking at other products and breaking them down and seeing, maybe try to wireframe a product you like and try to better understand why they made the design decisions that they did, and then take one that you don't like and just try to understand what about it is that you don't like. And then the other thing is that we're really trying to explain that a lot on our Wireframing Academy site. So there'll be a course coming out soon that's all about the principles and guidelines for each type of control. When should you use the tab navigation versus a list navigation versus a menu? When should you use drop downs versus radio buttons and checkboxes? So we're providing a lot of content about those kinds of things where you can learn very basic things about understanding the different types of UI controls and when and why you use them. So so our website, our Wireframing Academy, is going to have a lot of information targeted specifically at things like that.
Super. Thanks for that, Leon. Sumant, I can see a lot of questions still coming in.
Yeah.
Take two more, if that's good.
I would just have one, probably not so relevant a question, but it says, why the name Balsamic? I mean, a lot of folks are curious. What's the backstory? Can you just tell us about that?
Sure. So we have a little blurb about it on our website, but I'll try to summarize it. So our founder is an Italian. He is from the region of Italy where they make balsamic vinegar. So it's kind of a tribute to where he grew up, but he added a Q at the end so that when you Google it, you wouldn't get confused. But also the idea that balsamic vinegar is something that adds flavor to something else. It's not something that you ever drink straight, or it's an accompaniment to something else. So it makes other things better. And so that was kind of his idea, that a wireframe is not something that you use on its own, but it's something that adds flavor in a way.
That's a nice trivia. Maybe one more question for this session, and then we'll pick up a few more maybe on the Slack channel. But since there are a lot of product managers, one question that I see here: what is the best-in-class way for product managers to give a brief to wireframe designers or to their design team? Do you see like PRDs, or do you have like a document that you think is ideal to share this information in the right way?
So I, for a while, I worked in a development company that used agile development, and what they had me do actually is, I was a UX designer, but I was writing the user stories, and so that was a good way to work because it forces the designer to think about the business requirements as well, and think about the use cases, and also think about the acceptance criteria. So one thing you can do as a product manager actually is try to find a way to force your designers to be aware of all of the constraints. So if if the designers are designing and they're designing either in Balsamic or Figma or something like that, and they build something that looks really great, have them try to explain to you why it meets the goals, and have them talk to the developers and get their okay about it. Or if you're the PM and you're writing user stories, include the wireframes in the user stories. I really liked writing agile user stories because I felt like it was a good way to add requirements and some of the other type of functional information without just writing huge specs that nobody reads. So finding a way to supplement your designs with some text, something written. So maybe I liked writing out acceptance criteria in the user story. It must meet these requirements, or the data for this table is going to come from these fields in the database, or something like that. So finding a way to mix in the basic text that you need to explain the use case, and then also give instructions like a recipe for the developers, and then use the visual as a reference. But if you just do a huge PRD or something with not enough images, the problem is that people might not read it. So find something that, especially that a developer is going to read. So more images. Let the images do the work where images are more useful, and let the text do the work when text is needed.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, Leon. I think we're still seeing a lot of questions flow in. Maybe we should do an advanced Balsamic IQ session in, say, 3 months from now, when many of them who attend this session, whoever joins us on the Slack channel, we'll try getting Leon's time for an office hour in, say, a month's time, and hopefully we are better at this Let's try doing that. We'll definitely discuss this with Leon. And with that, I think Leon, fantastic session. Thank you so much for your time. From us at TPF and our entire community, thank you to you and Balsamic IQ for agreeing to do this. No better way to learn a tool from the guys who created it. So thank you so much for your time. And for everyone who joined this, feel free to give Leon a shout out. I think he's been doing some great stuff. Do check out whatever he's put out. We are just going to be bringing in more of these learning sessions. Hope you had fun. I know it was a bit fast, I agree, but hopefully we'll keep the learning going, and we'll try re-engaging with their team to give us something more. So today was probably a Kickstarter like how we did on analytics before. This one's our design. So as a product manager, I think it's super important for all of us here to pick up these hard skills as well. It's not just what's written in the books, and that's how we believe 2021 is going to go for all of us. But with that, I do have a couple of closing, but just want to take this moment to thank you, Leon. Thanks much for co-hosting this. And to everyone who's staying back, I have one or two things to share with you guys. Maybe Smart, if you want to catch Leon backstage, or Leon, if you want to continue on this session and hear the exciting updates that we as a community have, would love that as well. So with that, yeah, thanks once again to everyone else who stayed. So this is two things that I want to share. One is definitely any feedback that you have. I think for those who've attended our one that we have on analytics with Mixpanel, we are doing a couple of more sessions in analytics again this quarter. So you should have something that is deeper. That is definitely one. But on this, any feedback that you have, I think we're going to go deeper into no code and design as well. So parallel tracks that we believe, right? The entire year last that we did a bunch of sessions which are more on introduction to product, how to break into product, stuff like that. But this is going to be more hands-on. We believe that we are in the best position to at least enable this learning. The rest is definitely in your hands. So join in to the Slack channel. We'll be practicing this. I think dailyui.co is one website that Leon shared, but let's put that to learning for sure. And any feedback, right? Whatever you guys have next. I think no code, some of them mentioned. So we are definitely doing no code. Already in talks with a couple of people. So do see that coming in. That is one part of it, and that is a continuation. Just to reiterate, please do hand in your submissions by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Lots of interesting prizes for sure. That's to do with this session. Any feedback, anything that you have, feel free to let that come. Apart from that, the two announcements. For those who are already taking part in the teardown, do check out the OYO session. I think this has been fantastic. I just got an update that two of them have already been placed, right? One of them who won the Groffers has got an opportunity. The others are in their interview process. So if you are planning to break in, do definitely check out that series. It's theproductfolks.com/teardowns. Another interesting thing that we've come up with, it's not live yet. So just sharing this with the 167 live. To give you a brief update, we just put out a tweet today. Idea here is don't share it out there yet, right? We're sharing it with you today just to get some feedback because it is by the community for the community. We'll mostly be launching on either 31st or 1st, but yes, it's Friday night. You guys have stayed back for this. So the idea here is just like how startups have accelerators and incubators. Do you think something like this should exist for communities? I think we've been doing a volunteer-driven community for the last 2 years. So we're just thinking of something like a paid-forward campaign where we could help people build communities. There are a lot of amazing design communities. See, we're learning here in the product space, right? But we might have alternate interests. I enjoy design in today's session, but there are a lot of these budding communities which are in multiple spaces, right? This could be marketing growth. We run another community there, but there are lots that have sprung up in the last year. And we know how hard it is when you're starting grassroots. So if there's anyone here who's building community, we'd love to support you. We have something launching on the 31st, and if you guys want like a sneak peek, if you guys are interested to contribute, and like I mentioned, it's a paid forward by the community for the community. So there will be some amount of monetary support, or more than that, it's just about, we're calling it the collective, right? It's an accelerator program, which is essentially how do we support more of you all building such communities and helping others, right? So apart from the monetary bit, which is going to be minimal, but whatever we can definitely support it. But apart from that, it's going to be like office hours from global CMs. It's going to be a lot more of just being a part and growing together. If you guys find that interesting, do DM us on Twitter. Happy to share the link with you. If that sounds interesting, do join us. that is one thing that I want to share. I'm super excited about this. Marth knows it. Been working on this since December, and this is something that I want to share with you guys since you stayed. I mean, Friday night, right? You guys have been here on this learning session, and many of you all are familiar faces. So you guys have seen our journey. If this is something that you think might be beneficial for the entire community in general, do DM us. We're calling it the Accelerate program, so do check that out. These are two things that I wanted to announce. Smart, do you have any other exciting updates that you think we could? We're going to be hanging out on the networking launch posters. So if you guys want to catch us or understand more, but apart from that, you have our Twitter handle. Smart is active on Twitter. I'm active on Twitter. Do DM. You can check out the TPF handle as well. Smart, anything else that you like to
we'll
add?
just close this, I guess. Pretty excited for the submissions there. So yeah, I mean, I'm like literally on Twitter right now from my phone already. So looking out submissions, and let's see where we go from there.
Super. I also got a couple of DMs asking if you guys are interested to volunteer. Please DM. Yes, we do have a couple of positions open. We have a couple of conferences coming up, workshop series that's live. We are coming up with Learn PM with me version 2 in Sergio, which is generally in Q1 and or Q2 of every year. That's a smaller batch. We are revamping that. Bunch of initiatives which you guys have already seen. You can check out the other initiative on thepmfolks.com. And yes, thanks so much for joining in. Any feedback, we're always here. And yep, thanks again. I'll see you guys on the networking.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.